The following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
Tragedy visits Georgetown, Indiana.
The plan was to kill Kimberly Cam that night, and you can't leave any witnesses. It was a horrific crime. Senseless, brutal.
I don't have any problem killing your spouse. Happens every day. But parents don't kill their children unless there's some sort of wacko.
A family is murdered in cold blood. The evidence points to the grieving husband. But is he really responsible?
I didn't do it!
There was somebody else at the scene of the crime that night.
In the end, only forensic science can catch the killer. This dramatic reconstruction is based on eyewitness accounts, police evidence, and court records. On September 28, 2000, Indiana State Police receive a chilling call.
Get everybody out here to my house now! Okay, all right. My wife and my kids are dead! Get everybody out here to my house! Okay, David, we're good. We got people on the way, okay? Get everybody out here!
The frantic voice at the other end of the phone is well known to the police. It's former state trooper David Cam. He tells them his daughter Jill, age 5, son Brad, age 7, and wife Kim, age 35, have all been murdered. Cam's suburban home is soon teeming with familiar faces, including senior crime scene investigator Jim Niemeyer.
When I started this scene, it's traumatic. These people were known by the local state police officers, and it's a sad scene. I knew it was going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but once you get over it and you promise the victims you'll do everything you can for them to bring them justice, you go do your job.
He's joined by fellow investigator Sam Sarkeesian.
First thing I saw was what appeared to be some fluid coming out of the garage. My next observation was a small male that was laying on the garage floor.
He was prone on his side. He had clothing on that had been pulled up a little bit, exposing part of his chest, and there was some clothing underneath him, too.
It was a gray, athletic-type sweatshirt. It's kind of rolled up underneath his shoulder. My next observation was a white female adult. She was laying at the passenger side door of the Bronco. Obvious head wound. She wasn't wearing any pants, and they were by her head. She had a top on. She did have underwear, dark-colored underwear.
And then I saw the little girl. She was in the right rear passenger seat. She had a seatbelt on.
I could see the blonde hair draped over her face and a little bit of a blood streak coming down her cheek.
I could see some damage that had been done to the front of the scalp and the back of the scalp from more than likely a high-velocity projectile.
I saw a pair of shoes sitting on top of the Bronco. I didn't know why they were on top of the Bronco. I didn't know whether the victim had placed them up there or someone else had placed them up there.
Kimberly Cam's state of undress leads investigators to suspect she has been sexually assaulted.
We processed the bodies as far as bagging the hands, put them in a body bag, and then they were transported to the Kentucky Medical Examiner's office.
Dusting the Bronco, Sergeant Niemeyer discovers a partial palm print.
I was able to see some ridge detail develop on the edge of the post behind the passenger door.
Unfortunately, he is unable to find any fingerprints. The search for evidence moves inside the vehicle.
A projectile was gathered from underneath the windshield. Projectile was gathered in between the creases of the seat. And then from the back of the bed of the Bronco, probably the projectile that went through the little girl.
I was looking for the gun to see whether it was possible murder-suicide type situation. The gun wasn't there, so that ruled that out.
Authorities tried to assign motive to the killings.
So we have maybe a burglary, jealous wife getting even, maybe a jealous husband. It all went through my mind, what might have happened.
We didn't think that robbery was a motive. Her cell phone was still in the vehicle. Purse was in there. Didn't appear to be anything taken. The doors were locked. Didn't appear to be any breach of the house. At that time, we collect the evidence to have it analyzed, hoping that it does tell us a story or give us some information on who committed these crimes.
But the evidence is puzzling. Kim's state of undress, the grey sweatshirt and the shoes on the roof of the Bronco raise more questions than answers. Devastated husband and father David Kahn hovers nearby.
I started to walk toward him, but he kind of looked up and saw me, and he just turned around and walked away. He just didn't want me to have contact with him.
Troopers escort Cam to the local police detachment in hopes he can shed light on the night's horrific events and lead them to the person who slaughtered his entire family. Investigators continue to comb the evidence at the tragic scene.
He had a mother and two kids that had no reason on God's green earth to leave the world this quick and in that fashion. It was a horrific crime. Senseless, brutal.
Detectives prepare to interview a shaken David Cam, currently their only lead to solving the murders.
Like a coffee?
That'd be great.
What are you taking it?
Black.
Customarily, we try to get the family away from the scene. It's a lot less emotional and a little more private.
Cam surrenders his clothes in accordance with homicide investigation protocols.
There you are, David.
Thank you.
So, David, why don't you tell me what happened tonight?
I was at the community center. It's about 7:30.
On that evening, just before 7, he had decided to go play basketball at the church gym with some family members and some other co-workers. Afterwards, he had left the gym. Sometime between 9 and 9:20.
Cam claims that 5 minutes later he pulled into his driveway and came upon a terrifying scene.
When he pulled around, he opened the garage door and he saw what he thought was his daughter laying there, but turned out to be his wife.
He found his children in the back seat, bloody and motionless. Then Brad appeared to stir.
He thought that there were some sort of signs of life.
Cam tells detectives he reached over the console between the front seats to remove Brad from the vehicle. He then set his son on the floor and placed a nearby sweatshirt under him to stop the bleeding from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. But Cam's desperate efforts were in vain. Brad, like his little sister Jill and his mother Kim, was gone.
You have any idea who might have done this?
No!
He basically had no idea how this could have happened, who could have committed this.
The Cam house on Lockhart Road is soon the center of a media storm. as news of the brutal murder spreads. This apparently random killing has the community terrified. The bereaved ex-trooper seeks to find words for his loss.
I want my family back. I want my babies back. My wife.
I worship those children. I worship the ground they walk on. Life was perfect. My life had never been so good. At home, at work, with the kids, everything. It could not have been any more perfect.
But Detective Sarkeesian is not convinced by David Camm's version of events. Every crime scene tells a story, and the evidence in this case contradicts Camm's testimony.
David had told people that he had got into the vehicle and drug his son out, tried to perform CPR and render aid, and was running around in the garage. I didn't see any shoe prints.
Not only were there no prints, there was no blood smear, no signs of a father's frantic efforts to revive his son. The site was near pristine.
Some of the inconsistencies led us down a different path. That Dave Camm could have been involved.
Troopers now take a closer look at their former colleague and quickly unearth his history of rampant adultery.
Is it okay to call you Julie?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So tell me, how long have you known David Camm?
I've known him for about 4 years.
So where would you normally meet David?
Usually once a week in his cruiser.
He was a good-looking young man, and he was participating in that activity.
How come I don't see him more often?
I don't know, officer. Who is it this time?
But infidelity isn't hard evidence. Investigators hope that autopsies of Camm's family will lead medical examiner Dr. Tracy Corey to a viable suspect.
Bradley's face showed what is known as stippling or tattooing. The term used to describe where burned or burning gunpowder particles have actually impacted the skin and made small injuries. Indicates to me that truly he was looking right at the muzzle of the gun when the gun was fired.
Though disturbing, Brad's injuries do not leave clues to his killer. If Kim's murder was a sexual assault gone wrong, her autopsy could possibly deliver the attacker's DNA. But the results are not what authorities expect.
There was no evidence of any sexual assault on the mother, Kim.
It's the autopsy of Cam's daughter, Jill, that produces a startling revelation.
There was evidence of trauma to the outside of the genital region. There's no evidence of healing, so that wound occurred, probably within the 24 hours prior to death.
Although Dr. Corey can't be certain, she suspects the girl was sexually assaulted.
So if she was molested, then who molested her? And
Suspicion falls on David Camm.
That looks excellent.
It's clear that his home life was far from perfect. It could be that it was perverse.
Thank you, little Miss Professional.
What you got?
Then, a damning forensic report is released that places Camm in his garage at the time of the murders.
He's lying. Yeah. Yeah, we'll bring him in.
Detectives now confront Camm with the mounting evidence against him.
Dave Camm attempted to tell the detective how he had climbed in the vehicle and how he had carried Brad out and how he'd stepped over everybody and was careful not to disturb the crime scene. I think he actually used those words in his interview, which I thought was pretty odd. Because if it had been my family there, I wouldn't have cared about their crime scene. The investigators did ask him about any extramarital affairs, which he totally denied having.
Things were not that way. Things were good. Things were good.
David Camm's reaction to the news of his daughter's sexual molestation is surprising.
know the thing about Jill. We know the fact that she had been sexually molested.
I don't know anything about that. So how could you know something about that?
Thought that was a little odd. He wasn't overly upset. You know, if someone told me that, I would have been very upset, you know, and asking how, why, what are you talking about?
Finally, detectives reveal the contents of the damning forensic report.
Dave, problem that there is high velocity blood spray on your shirt.
On my t-shirt?
Yes.
That's wrong. That's not right.
There's blood on your shirt. Only way that comes on is from low back from a gunshot wound. They're minute particles that travel at extremely high speeds, and they come in contact with a surface and stick to it.
What they told us was there's only one way you could have that. He said you had to be present whenever one of them were shot.
And they told him that they were going to place him under arrest. And he just told them they were wrong. You're wrong. And that was it.
All right, David, stand up.
Authorities now believe their friend and former colleague is not the victim of a horrible crime. He's the perpetrator. With the evidence stacked against him, Cam hires high-profile Indiana defense attorney Mike McDaniel.
We shook hands, sat down, and just started talking. Part of my job is trying to read people and see where I'm getting yanked along, and he was extremely believable.
Drove up to my house into the driveway.
Very convincing, and his anguish was very compelling.
Take your time.
McDaniel is assisted by his wife, Debbie.
I don't have any problem killing your spouse. Happens every day. I can see getting angry enough at a spouse to kill your spouse. But parents don't kill their children unless they're some sort of wacko.
In January 2002, a little more than a year after the murders, David Cam goes on trial for his life.
All my clients are innocent. David was really, really innocent. And that's just the way he came across. I'm getting ready to make opening statements, and I'm feeling pretty good.
But the prosecution hammers out a compelling case, showing that David Cam is anything but a devoted husband and father.
Where did you and the defendant...
They put a parade of women on the stand to testify they'd either had sex with Cam or been propositioned by him.
Get together.
Well, once a week, David and I used to get together in his police cruiser.
Then, the state cites what it believes to be David Cam's appalling motive for murder.
Prosecution is now offering up a theory that David was sexually depraved.
Trauma to the genital area.
All this other stuff shows that he was likely to molest Jill. He's obviously something is wrong with him.
No, come on, I can't believe you
It's
did this.
her
You're a monster.
imagination.
No, I can't.
At the point David's life was unraveling, his wife was leaving him, his child had been molested. I mean, he would be ostracized by everybody, his family, his fellow co-workers, everybody. He's losing everything.
Yeah, we'll do, thanks.
The argument goes that Cam, fearing his wife would expose him, resolved to silence her and the children. The prosecution contends that David Cam came home around 9:30 p.m.
What did I say about fighting with each other?
lay in wait for his family, and executed them. Then he staged the scene to make it look like a sexual assault gone wrong. He removed Brad from the vehicle to make it appear as if he had tried to save him. When done, he went into the house and called 911.
United States Police Radio, Patrice, can I help you?
Patrice, it's Dave Cam. Let me talk to Post Command right now.
Okay, he's on another line.
Yeah, let me talk to Post Command.
Hold on.
To reinforce its case, the state plays its trump card. The blood spatter on Cam's t-shirt.
On the front lower portion of David Cam's t-shirt, there are 8 individual stains. In my opinion, they are back spatter from the gunshot to Jill.
But the defense has its own experts, who contend Kim's blood had begun to separate into component layers before police arrived, a process that takes hours. This discovery moves the time of death back from 9:30 closer to 7:30 p.m.
Kim and the children, therefore, would have had to have been killed a significant time period before David got home after the basketball game. He could not have left the game, gone home, killed his family, come back and played basketball. There was not time.
With Cam's presence at the game confirmed by all 11 fellow players, his alibi is airtight. Or so it would seem.
Was with me and the other guys playing basketball like we do every week.
9 weeks of testimony ends. The jury deliberates for 3 days and returns with a verdict.
David Cam, the jury finds you guilty as charged.
I think the evidence came down to the shirt. I think it was overwhelming. He was present when his family was murdered. Whatever the motive was, the physical evidence is undisputed. And I think that was what convicted David Cam.
He is sentenced to 195 years. Case closed.
Open 5.
But in a stunning twist, new evidence will surface that may exonerate Cam and bring the real killer of his family to justice. After the former trooper has served 3 years of his triple life sentence, the community remains divided on his case, and debates about his guilt or innocence threaten to tear the town apart.
If you can't imagine yourself losing a wife and 2 children, that's your whole family that's been massacred. And you find them. And then you're charged with it, and you know you didn't do it. Jails and prisons are not great places to allow you to step back and deal with your grief, to deal with your loss.
Cam never wavers in his insistence that he's innocent. And he hires a new defense lawyer, Kitty Lyle, to prepare his appeal.
One of the biggest hurdles the defense always has to get past is the power of the accusation. People don't want to believe the cops get it wrong. People certainly don't want to believe that the police can falsely accuse one of their own, because that strikes fear in the very heart of our criminal justice system.
Lyle contends that the blood spattered on Cam's t-shirt was the result of transfer, not blowback from a gunshot. Jill had blood in her hair from her wound. When Cam reached through to remove Brad, his shirt and Jill's hair made contact. And this contact created the 8 tiny points of blood, so crucial in convicting him. Lyle also discovers that the assault on 5-year-old Jill is just a theory, not a forensic fact.
there's no evidence that she was molested. Dr. Corey has always been consistent that she could not give a cause for the blunt force trauma. I knew after spending hours with him, he had not done it. There was no way.
I finished up there.
And I knew that intuitively. I knew that from hearing his story, and I knew it from the alibi witnesses.
Lyle finds it incredible that the jury could disregard the testimony of 11 men who said they'd spent all evening with Cam. Poring over case files, she's entirely baffled by his conviction until she reads the prosecutor's evidence focusing on his many affairs.
And what is a great way to get around evidence of innocence? Through speculation, innuendo, and character assassination. They painted Dave Cam as being a cold, calculating womanizer.
The tactic clearly succeeded in demonizing him to the jury. Lyle launches a successful appeal based on her claim that Cam's affairs were irrelevant to the crime.
And indeed, the Court of Appeals wrote, but for the misconduct of the prosecutor in bringing in this irrelevant extramarital relationships, there's a good possibility David Cam would have been found not guilty.
New county prosecutor Keith Henderson is handed the case and must decide if he'll free Cam or try him again.
I needed to look at the evidence that we had to see if it was a viable case. We'll always keep our minds open to a possibility that David Cam could be innocent.
Henderson assembles a new team of investigators whose job is to re-examine everything involved with the murders. Among them is veteran detective Gary Gilbert.
There was a meeting that was set up to see if there might be other avenues that might be looked at that maybe haven't been explored the first time through. And there was about 30 boxes of paperwork, case reports, pleadings, attachments, photographs.
One of the first steps in reviewing this case was obviously to analyze the crime scene photographs. And the gray sweatshirt was noticed lying underneath Bradley.
Lab experts pore over the sweatshirt and soon make a startling discovery.
There was some unknown DNA that was found on the sweatshirt that was never identified the first time through.
This is great news for the defense.
There is forensic evidence that there was somebody else at the scene of the crime that night.
Along with the DNA, another intriguing clue.
We found out that it had a name written in the back which appeared to be Backbone.
The DNA profile from the shirt is run through a statewide offender database, and the case takes a dramatic turn.
There was a hit, Charles Darnell Bonet.
Ex-convict Bonet has a long record of violence against women and a documented lust for their feet and shoes.
He attacked 5 women, and each attack became more brutal. On a couple of the attacks, he wore a mask like this, a China doll mask.
Give me your shoe! Give me your shoe!
What?
Give me your shoe!
My shoe?
Yes, your shoe!
Here.
And obviously the red flag goes up because we have a pair of Kim's shoes that is situated very neatly on top of the Bronco that no one has ever really been able to explain.
Investigators discover that their suspect is also known by an alias.
His nickname was Backbone, which was found in the collar of the sweatshirt.
Bonet is quickly located across the river in nearby Louisville, Kentucky, and brought to New Albany for questioning.
Okay, Charles. Explain this.
He confirms the gray sweatshirt is his, or rather was his.
That's mine.
He gave it away a long time ago.
He told us he had put the clothes in a Salvation Army drop box.
Bonet is adamant he knows nothing about the crime. That his sweatshirt was at the scene is a coincidence, nothing more.
And I didn't
shoot those people.
There's not enough evidence to hold the new suspect. But before Bonet is released, Detective Gilbert gets a souvenir.
We've matched the palm print of Charles Bonet to the palm print on the side of the Bronco.
Bonet's DNA, his palm print, and the sweatshirt all place him at the murders. For Kitty Lyle, this is proof positive that Bonet is the real killer of the Cam family.
His history was of escalating violence. We believe that Boney saw Kim Cam and became attracted to her. The day of the murders, a car identified as looking just like Boney's car was seen slowly going down Lockhart Lane.
Lyle suspects Bonet followed Kim Cam for several days before deciding to act on his darkest fantasy.
We believe that Boney was laying in wait.
Give it back, it's mine! Did I say about fighting with each other?
Then he realized she wasn't alone.
Okay, that's enough.
He then shot her in the head in a fit of rage.
After executing Kim, Bonet turned his fury on little Jill and caused her blunt force trauma.
He took the muzzle of that gun and poked it between Jill Cam's legs. Shut up! Shut up!
When the children wouldn't stay quiet, Bonet silenced them. For good.
He needed to get rid of the kids because they were witnesses. He is a sexual predator with an obsession for women's legs and feet, and he placed those shoes up on top of the Bronco as if he was placing them on a pedestal. Shoes were his trophies. Not only did he leave his sweatshirt, he left his DNA, he left his palm print, but more importantly, he left his sexual predator signature.
Lyle believes that something startled Bonet before he could assault Kim. Fearing discovery, he panicked and fled.
And we had only prayed and hoped that justice would finally occur for not only Dave, but Kim Bradley and Jill and the rest of the family that had been grieving ever since that night of September 28th.
Investigators haul Charles Bonet back in and confront him with irrefutable evidence, placing him at the scene.
Why don't you tell me what really happened?
So he had to start thinking about things that he could do to try and at least minimize his involvement.
All right, look.
Under pressure, Bonet lays out a story.
Talked about meeting David Cam at Community Park. They had a second meeting. David Cam started making requests pertaining to whether or not he would have the ability to get a clean gun.
Maybe. What's that gonna cost? A few hundred. All right. Let's see what I can do.
Bonet claims he obtained the weapon, then went to Cam's home to complete the transaction.
Got it?
When he handed the gun to David Cam, he had it wrapped up in a sweatshirt.
Cash in hand, Bonet says he left the house, got into his car, and was about to leave when another vehicle approached.
He states that the Bronco pulls him. Some arguing going on, but he can't really hear what the discussion is about. Then he hears 3 shots.
And at that point, he said he got out of the car, walked up the driveway to see what was going on.
He sees Kimberly Cam on the floor.
He walked to the side of the vehicle.
And then look into the Bronco by putting his hand on the doorpost.
Was trying to explain away his palm print on the side.
Then, Bonet claims that Cam approached and tried to kill him, but the gun misfired. Cam retreated into the house, and Bonet tried to flee the scene.
But he trips over the shoes, decides to pick him up, place him on top of the Bronco.
He picked up the shoes and set them on the car, which was the first indication in his statement that really locked him in, because that's part of the investigation that had never been revealed.
He tried to shoot me too, but the gun jammed.
When I hear Charles Darnell Bonet say that David Camp has just tried to kill him and takes the time to pick up the shoes and neatly place them on top of the Bronco, that just doesn't make any sense.
His story that Dave Cam tried to shoot him, but the gun jammed, is absolutely preposterous.
I swear to God.
Dave Cam was on the SWAT team. He was a skilled marksman. There is no doubt that Dave Cam could unjam any handgun blindfolded in 2 seconds.
The ex-con goes on to spin more versions for detectives, each one less convincing than the last. Charles Darnell Bonet is charged with 3 counts of murder. And David Cam gets the news he's waited on for years.
State moves to dismiss all charges against Dave Cam without prejudice.
Woohoo! Now a toast for justice. Joe, hold that for me. Thanks very much.
He is released from jail, but his celebration is short-lived. Within 60 minutes, he's rearrested.
Call my lawyer.
Prosecutor Henderson believes forensic evidence places David Cam at the crime scene and files new charges claiming Cam and Bonet acted together.
Because now not only do I have 3 counts of murder, I have 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder.
The pair are sent to be tried in different counties 100 miles apart. The evidence against Bonet proves overwhelming. His trial lasts only 7 days before he's convicted of the homicides and sentenced to 225 years.
Whether Charles Bonet pulled one of the triggers or not, he was culpable of murder, because whether one assists or one pulls the trigger in our state and under our law, that person is equally culpable for murder.
Cam is behind bars once again, but Kitty Lyle is confident his airtight alibi will finally set him free.
Prosecution knew that they had a real problem, and that problem was the 11 alibi witnesses. How were they get around that?
But as Cam's second trial commences, Detective Gary Gilbert re-examines the testimony of all who played basketball that night. And he discovers that Cam's airtight alibi has a few holes.
We were able to pinpoint some certain inconsistencies with their statements.
Common sense tells us if you have 1 or 2 people sitting out of a game while the others are playing full-court basketball, you're not watching the other person the entire time.
It was difficult to fathom that many people could say that they kept track of David that long.
And on cross-examination, they admitted that. They could not say for sure whether he left and came back.
No, I didn't have my eyes on him the whole time.
This revised testimony is a big blow to the defense. But the question lingers whether David Cam really had enough time to slip away, drive home, and murder his entire family. Prosecutor Henderson believes he did.
How long does it take to kill 3 people? I submit that it takes pop, pop, pop. It doesn't take minutes, it takes seconds. So we had ample time to leave under cover of the basketball game. As a state trooper, David Cam had worked a number of criminal cases himself, and he understood what the basketball game would give him by way of alibi.
Once again, Cam's trial is steeped in controversy. Still, it remains to be seen if he'll be convicted again, when a violent offender has already been found guilty of the same brutal crime. Four years have passed since the triple homicide, but the sense of revulsion in the court is as strong as ever. To prosecutor Keith Henderson, the defendant's motive has always been clear.
I believe David Camp had molested 5-year-old Jill. Kimberly Camp found out about that and was prepared to leave him. And I do not believe that David Camp could allow that to happen. I don't think David Camp could live with that shame.
Some elements of the first trial, such as Cam's infidelities, have been ruled inadmissible. But the bedrock of the case against him remains the same.
The blood spatter evidence was a major portion of the forensic evidence. The T-shirt worn by David Camp the night that he shot his family had back spatter or high-velocity impact spatter on it, and that was a focal point of the prosecution's case.
To be there when that shot was fired. I don't care who fired the shot. He was there when that little girl was executed.
Now the state sets out to convince a jury that David Camp and Charles Bonnet teamed up to commit the deadly act.
A plan that had been derived by two individuals. The plan was to kill Kimberly Camp that night, and you can't leave any witnesses.
I believe Charles Bonnet's role was to hold the family there when they came home from swim practice.
Give it back, it's mine! Just give her back her bear, okay? That's enough.
Don't move.
Mommy? Honey, just sit still, okay? Just sit still.
David Camp didn't know exactly what time he was going to arrive. I think Charles Bonnet was there to control the family, keep them in that location.
It's okay, sit still. David, careful, he's got a gun.
Wait inside. I can't let you leave me. I can't let you expose me. I can't!
David, not in front of the children.
I'm confident that David Camp pulled the trigger.
Jurors are told Bonnet's post-murder role was to clean up any incriminating evidence, while Cam returned to the game. Or so he thought. It turns out Cam had other ideas.
What are you, crazy?
No loose ends.
Part of Cam's plan was to kill Bonnet and say that he came home from the ball game and found Bonnet in the house. He'd killed his family, and he wrestled him with a gun, and he killed him. He would have been a hero.
Henderson believes parts of Bonnet's story were true. One is that he only lived because the murder weapon, determined to be a Lawson 380, is known for a troubling flaw.
The Lawson is a very cheap weapon. The common thing that happens is it misfires.
When the Lawson jammed, Cam needed another way to pin the murder on Bonnet. And the gray sweatshirt gave him one.
I believe that David Camp planted the sweatshirt there.
The reason that the sweatshirt was left to throw some suspicion off of him to Bonnet.
The defense insists that the prosecution's revised version of the crime is far-fetched and desperate.
For those who say that David Camp planned this out, went to the basketball game, somehow snuck out of the gym without anyone noticing, went home, met up with Charles Bonnet, murdered his family, came back, is preposterous.
For the second time, a jury retires to consider David Camp's fate. 4 days later, they are still deliberating.
I started to become concerned that we may have a hung jury. I didn't really want to allow myself to think that.
Finally, a verdict is reached, and all parties return to the courtroom.
As those jurors came in one by one, I could tell who was with us and who was not with us. You could tell by their body language. That's when it really hit me. This isn't looking good.
We, the jury,
For the murder of his family, David Cam is again found guilty and sentenced to life.
As I was listening to the judge and looking at the jurors, I immediately thought of Kimberly, Cam, Bradley, and Jill. There finally had been accountability. David Cam was held accountable for the atrocious crimes.
Lyle remains convinced of Cam's innocence and continues to work on his behalf.
A number of issues which deprived Dave of a fair trial, some of which we have touched upon. The improper argument that he molested his daughter and that was motive to kill, and the exclusion of the evidence of innocence and that Bonet acted alone.
Lyle is petitioning that Bonet's criminal history be addressed in Cam's case. Specifically, the nature of Bonet's violent attacks on women and his foot fetish.
We tried to get in Boney's prior crimes because of his distinct M.O. Judge didn't allow it. That created a perfect storm that resulted in a fundamentally unfair trial.
For the prosecution team, the case is finally closed. But none of them will ever forget the horror of the crime.
The hardest thing for me in any case, in any death investigation especially, is when it involves children. No telling what kind of future they might have had.
I've been doing this for about 33 years, and you get pretty calloused. But I'll never forget the picture of Jill Cam. I'll never forget Bradley. Or Kim. And it'll live with me till the day I die. I look at my kids, I look at my grandkids. You know, these little fellows were just as innocent as new snow. And they deserved nothing whatsoever like this.
This was not just a normal crime, and it haunted me for a long time. I was very relieved when we got the second conviction on David Cam. It's really rewarding to know that the mother and the little girl and little boy, they got their justice.